Okay, today I will start the presentation with the subtopic of global risk. What is global risk? A global risk is defined by the World Economic Forum as an occurrence that causes significant negative impact for several countries and industries over a time frame of up to 10 years. These are risks with a systemic nature which could affect the system as a whole and not only parts of it or individuals. There are 5 main categories of global risk. Firstly is environmental, second is geopolitical, third is societal, fourth is economic, and lastly is technological. Okay, first, environmental risk. Risks in the environmental category include both natural disasters such as earthquakes and geomagnetic storms, and man-made risks such as collapsing ecosystem, freshwater shortage, nuclear accident, and failure to mitigate or adapt to climate change. Okay, second is geopolitical risk. The geopolitical category covers the areas of politics, diplomacy, conflict, crime, and global governance. These risks range from terrorism, dispute over resources, and war to governments being undermined by corruption, organized crime, and illicit trade. Okay, next we go to the societal risk. The societal category captures risks related to social stability, such as severe income disparities, food crisis, and dysfunctional cities, and public health such as pandemics, antibiotic-resistant bacteria, and the rising burden of chronic disease. Okay, fourth, economic risk. Risks in the economic category include fiscal and liquidity crisis, failure of a major financial mechanism or institution. And lastly, technological risk. The technological category covers major risks related to the growing centrality of information and communication technologies to individuals, businesses, and governments. These include cyber attacks, infrastructure disruptions, and data loss. There are 10 top global risks. Economic slowdown or slow recovery. Second is regulatory or legislative changes. Third is increasing competition. Fourth is damage to reputation or brand. Fifth is failure to attract or retain top talent. Sixth is failure to innovative or meet customer needs. 7 is business interruption. 8 commodity price risk. 9 cash flow or liquidity risk, and lastly political risk or uncertainties. There are 4 steps to optimizing global risk management. Step 1, annual risk assessment. Step 2, quarterly mitigation plans. Step 3, dashboards. And lastly, step 4, heat maps. That's all from me, and we go to the next presenter.
Next, I will continue the slide with systematic risk. Okay, what is systematic risk? Systematic risk known as market risk or non-diversifiable risk. It is the fluctuation of returns that caused by events like war, inflation, political events, and macroeconomic factors that will affect all risky assets. And therefore, these risks are not unique to a given investment vehicle. This risk includes all the unforeseen events that might happen in everyday life, therefore making it beyond the control of the investor themselves. Systematic risk is the opposite with unsystematic risk, where this risk will impact the whole industry rather than a single company or security. There are types of systematic risk, which are including the first one, interest rate risk. This risk is the result of a change in the market interest rate, where it mainly impacts the fixed income securities, as bond prices are inversely related to the interest rate. To make it clear, the chance that returns will be better or worse than expected return because of changes in the level of interest rate. Interest rate changes is somehow affected by the rate of inflation. If the actual inflation rate is higher than expectation, then there will be pressure to increase the interest rate. The second one is market risk. It is the result of the general tendency of the investor to move with the market. So, it is basically the tendency of security prices to move collectively. There is the chance that market influences will affect expected return of all equities in ways that were not anticipated. The third one is purchasing power. It is also known as inflation risk, where it occurs due to the erosion in the purchasing power of money, where when investment return is lower than the risk of inflation, the investment assets will shrink. The presence of inflation gives rise to the concept of yield rate of return. The fourth one is exchange rate. This risk stems from the uncertainty in the changes in the value of the currency. And the last one is political risk. This risk occurs primarily due to political instability in a country or a region. This is some example of situation where the systematic risk may occur. For example, inflation and interest rate changes. These changes will affect the entire market. Therefore, one can only avoid it by not investing in any risky assets. Another example situation is like changes to law, tax reforms, interest rate hikes, natural disaster, political instability, foreign policy changes, currency value changes, failure of banks, and economic recession. Next, how to minimize this risk. As we all know, systematic risks affect the complete market and are unavoidable through diversification. Therefore, we can say that this risk is out of control and it is impossible to eliminate by an individual. This is because the influencing factors of systematic risk come from macroeconomic sources, which are beyond our control. As individuals, we do not have control over the unemployment rate of our country. We cannot reduce or control the inflation rate. We cannot fix the oil price. We cannot change the market interest rate, or even we cannot improve our unexpected economic recession situation by our own. Only the proper economic policy taken by the government can change or control these factors. That's why, as an individuals, we cannot minimize systematic risk. But to help manage systematic risk, investors should ensure that their portfolios include a variety of asset classes, such as fixed income, cash, real estate, each of which will react differently in the event of a major systemic change. An increase in interest rates, for example, will make some new issue bonds more valuable while causing some company stocks to decrease in using beta to systematic risk. Why systematic risk matter? This is because of market efficiency. You will not be compensated for the additional risks that arise from failure to diversify your portfolio. This is extremely important for those who may have a large holding of one stock as part of employer-sponsored incentive plan. Next slide, I will show you a short video that related to systematic risk.
As the name suggests, systemic risk is basically the risk that an entire system collapses after the fall of one market participant. Let's refer to the banking system and assume that in a certain country there are 55 banks. 5 big banks with a market share of 10% each, and 50 much smaller banks with a market share of 1% each. If a bank fails, we can quickly identify 2 risk factors. 1. The other banks which did business with the failed bank will suffer losses. 2. Depositors might panic and stop trusting banks in general, thus deciding to take their money out. In our scenario, if only one of the 1% market share banks falls, the banking system will most likely survive. Yes, some banks will lose money and some depositors might panic, but most likely not enough to push the system over the edge. However, if one of the 5-10% banks goes bankrupt, it's quite likely that the banking system as a whole will collapse. Not certain, but definitely likely. These big banks tend to be considered systemically important or too big to fail, and as such, governments will do whatever they can to ensure they survive. After the Great Recession, for example, governments rescued banks, but also insurance companies such as AIG or auto companies such as General Motors. One important question arises. Doesn't the special treatment systemically important institutions receive lead to moral hazard situations?
Complexity risk. What is complexity risk? Complexity risk is the study of complex systems, which is about understanding indirect effects. Problems that are difficult to solve are often hard to understand because the causes and effects are not obviously related. Pushing on a complex system here often has effect over there because the parts are interdependent. Complexity risk is heavily impacts on schedule risk, which is the more complexity risk, the more need force to get things done, which may take longer. Okay, now let's move to the role of complexity risk. Complexity risk creates sources of new opportunities and increase the challenge. For the opportunities, first, it will gaining competitive advantage to the organization. Competitive advantage means the factors that allow a company to produce goods or service better or more cheaply than its rivals. For example, cost structure, branding, the quality of product offerings, the distribution network, intellectual property, and also customer service. Second, creating new and better strategies. For example, create a strategic planning team which can help with every phase of the process from creating a company vision to adapting the strategy week to week. Third, expanding into new markets. For instance, analyzing the target market, customer profile, demographics, market analysis, and etc. Last, for the opportunities is making their organization more efficient. For example, use software programs or update the software program to design specifically to improve efficiency or effectiveness in the organization. While for the challenge, one of the most noteworthy challenge is managing increasing risks due to constant innovation, complicated regulation and government oversight, the abundance of information, and in addition to challenge, sources of opportunities are created by increasing the complexity. Okey semua, jangan tidur lagi. Now, how to reduce complexity risk? Here are 3 ways to reduce complexity risk. First, resolve it. Just fix it, make it go away, use a different technology that is tried and tested, add more time to the schedule, throw money at the problems whatever it takes. For example, by improve information management technology. Okay, what is information management technology? Information management technology refers to the process, systems, hardware, and software a company uses to conduct its day-to-day operations. Other than that, we can reduce it. Make the complexity risk less severe with less of an impact on the organization. This really does rely on the organization understanding on what is behind the complexity risk so that the organization can unpick it and come up with some strategies to chip away at it. For example, investing in new geographies, to perform the same basic function of market segmentation. Also, changing the configuration of the organization, which is a set of components that have to be considered in possible combinations to perform its mission and achieve its end state while maintaining its viability and performance of the organization. Next, live with it. Live with it. Choosing the right person to lead the organization when complexity risk is involved. Different types of complexity risk issues require different skills at the top. For instance, you can developing and hiring new skills needed who have specialties in critical thinking to make good decisions and take appropriate action to solve the problems. We can take a lesson from Sony Ericsson. Due to lack of expertise in dealing with the risk of complexity, Sony Ericsson facing huge losses and bankruptcy. This is because, at first, it failed to recognize New Mexico plants as a bottleneck in a complex and interconnected global supply chain. Sony Ericsson is not the only company to suffer a catastrophe due in part to the complexity of its own systems. They have tried to manage risk by focusing on potential threats outside the organization, which is competitors, shifts in the strategic landscape, natural disasters, or geopolitical events. Unfortunately, they are generally less skilled at detecting internal vulnerabilities that makes damage not only possible, but in many cases unavoidable.
The last part, I will explain about the financial risk of climate change. Climate change poses real risk to the economy. For example, rising sea level, flood, and drought have displaced from their homes, disrupt commerce, and threat to natural resources. Climate-related risks have three. The first one is the physical risk. The second one is the transaction risk, and the last one is the liability risk. Physical risk, property damage, poor harvest, trade disruption due to extreme weather can affect on asset value and creditworthiness. Contohnya, sesebuah rumah itu dilanda ribut akan menyebabkan value pada rumah itu akan menurun. For the transaction risk, method of adjustment towards lower carbon economy include change in policy, technology can affect stranded asset and reduce profitability. Sebagai contoh, sebuah syarikat atau kilang perlu membuat penyelarasan dalam teknologi pengeluaran untuk mengurangkan pelepasan gas rumah hijau ke atmosfera, terutamanya gas karbon dioksida, dan ini akan mengurangkan keuntungan kepada kilang atau syarikat itu. For the liability risk, higher compensation costs of party who suffer loss due to climate change. Liability risk ni kebanyakannya akan ditanggung oleh syarikat insurans untuk membayar papasan kepada parti yang mengalami kerugian kerana perubahan iklim. The climate risk impact to financial system. The first one is the credit and insurance. Losses and impairment of retail, residential and corporate loans. For example, devaluation of residential and commercial properties, rise in claims or benefit payouts. The second one is the financial market loss. Lower corporate profitability and increased litigation lead to fair value of loss due to devaluation of equities, bonds, and commodities. The third one is the feedback loop. It's a process in which the output of a system are circled back and used as input. For example, financial contagion feeding back to the economy. Climate change and the bank function have 5. The first one is the monetary policy, managing financial stability, financial inclusion, financial advisor to government and corporate citizen the country. The bank function of climate change is the first one, monetary policy. Adverse impact of climate change can impact growth and inflation with implication on monetary policy setting. The second one is the managing financial stability. Banks and insurer asset and liability call for appropriate regulation and supervision to ensure that financial institutions are adequately measuring against climate risk. The third one is the financial inclusion. The need for financial institutions to offer meaningful financial solutions that can help households to better cope with climate-related events. The next function of the bank is financial advisor to government. Bank must range analysis and research on the economic development and physical implication for adaptation policy of the government to reduce transition and physical risk. The last one is the corporate citizen the country. Increasing expectation by shareholder and stakeholder for the bank to lead by sustainability practice in its operation. For example, operates as an organization with low carbon footprint. The next is Joint Committee on Climate Change. In September 2019, the Bank and Security Commission Malaysia established the CH03 to coordinate financial industry collective response to climate risk. In this board is a member and observer include representatives from across the financial sector, government agency, and investor. First community is risk management. Risk management is facilitate development of climate-related prudential standard and risk management policy. The second community is governance and disclosure. Recommend strategy, indicative and relevant best practice for financial institutions. The third community is product and innovation. Explore and measure to increase supply of financing and protection solutions that support climate risk mitigation and adaptation. And the fourth community is enhancement and capacity building. Establish connection with non-financial service sector, via key institutions and agencies to increase climate risk awareness. That's all for us.